Hello, everybody. I just thought I'd take a little bit here to make a quick tutorial for some newer players. A little bit of a recap on this. I was watching a streamer last night who apparently this was her first time playing Monster Hunter, which is fine. Except the problem was through all three of the earlier chapters with the story and the lower rank hunts, she never did a single hunt solo. She always brought in people from her Twitch chat to carry her. So now that she's in the high rank hunts, she still didn't even know any of the basics. And at one point, she got disconnected from the servers, which kicked everybody else out. And so she had to try and do the hunt solo. And I feel bad for laughing as hard as I did, but the panic was hilarious. And she had no idea what she was doing, which, again, that's fine. It's a game. Not everybody's going to hard grind, but she did kind of shoot herself in the foot by waiting till the high rank to do it solo. But just watching her play made me realize just how many of the basics this game has failed to cover. For people who have played older games, Rise, Worlds, even the original ones back in early PlayStation days, already knew most of it going in, but things like your slinger or eating beforehand or the effects of different things that you can shoot from the slinger. And then the big addition in this one is just like the Seikret Pouch, where they do give you quest related items on nearly every mission. But the one in question, she was on the mission with I forget what they're called, the Kuluyati or whatever, the lava breathing chicken looking things, where you have to actually capture one. And the tutorial for capturing in this game sucks. I'm just going to be straight up with that. So just going to take a moment to go over some basics that like very new players to the game would need to know. Alright, so first up we're going to talk about resource gathering. One of the biggest complaints people have with this game, especially early on, is the lack of freedom when you're walking, because by the storyline, you're forced to follow the NPCs around, and so you can't even collect half the stuff you walk by. Well, that's not entirely true. As you're walking through, if you look on the left side here, you can see where it says herb. You can aim it, hold left trigger and aim and shoot it, and it'll pick it up. But there's even an easier way than that. Let me go forward a bit until we have multiple. Okay, right there. You hold left trigger, and instead of aiming, you use your D-pad. And look, you can cycle through the things, anything in range, and just hit circle. And so as you're stuck in those cutscenes, walking with the NPCs, you can just constantly be doing this, farming everything you walk past. So, especially in the early game when you're still in the story, that's a good trick to know. A lot of people miss out on a lot of resources, just because they don't realize they can farm it from a range using the slinger. And even if they do know they can do that, they don't realize you can just scroll through the list. Because if you're rushing through trying to get to a monster, and you see something you want, you shouldn't have to stop. Like, I want that rock burst. And easy farming. One quick thing to mention on that, though, on the larger items, or any items that can be collected more than once, like your mineral deposits, your bone piles, even some of the monster corpses, you cannot farm it with the slinger. You see how it grayed out when I go to select it? Those you do have to actually walk over and farm. So any high rarity items or large looting structures, you will still have to do manually. Go away, bugs.
The hunt is on!
Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is actually a new addition in Wilds, and that is your Seikret Pouch. Any supplies the game thinks you should be required to use during a mission, whether it be the traps or the trank bombs, or like here, I took an optional quest in a very hot area, so it's going to give me items to help with that. So anytime you're riding the Seikret, just hit left on your D-pad, and it'll open an item box. And like I said, since I'm taking a quest in a lava field, it automatically gives me cool drinks. Now, it doesn't give you the maximum amount, it just gives you the maximum it thinks you'll need. So if you end up taking 10 times longer on the hunt than the game expected, then yes, you'll have to go craft your own. But it always gives you what it thinks you will need. So it'll give you the cold drinks here. If you're in the ice cliffs, it'll give you the hot drinks. If you're out to capture something, it'll give you the capture supplies. So that's a little bit of a handicap, I guess. None of the other games have held your hand quite that much, but it's a nice addition still, because you don't have to spend as much time farming. But a lot of people don't even seem to realize that that's a thing. So anytime you're on your mount, just left D-pad. And not only at the start of the match, there's been several fights where I forgot to restock on potions beforehand, but throughout the fight you'll hear new supplies have been delivered. I think it's like every 5 minutes or something like that. And open the pouch and they've somehow managed to deliver more potions or more first aid kits, etc. throughout the fight. And there's been multiple fights where I have survived just on those. So that's definitely a good mechanic for people to know about. So we already talked a little bit about looting while you're riding around, but one thing you need to keep an eye on is the pods. Like right there, you see a thorn grass. Let me get off. You see a thorn grass pod. Anything that you see pod, you know is going to be ammo for your slinger. And you always want to keep something in it, even if it's not the best. Just to give you another option, because if there's a monster you can't hit, or need to get knocked out of the sky, or just want to get free damage, they all have different benefits. Now, I'm not too worried about the thorn pod here, but I mean, you've got thunder, fire, you've got all the elements, you've got slicing, you've got piercing, but one of the most useful ones is actually dung. Because as you get into the higher level, you'll start having it happen more frequently, where you'll have to fight multiple monsters at the same time. In fact, one of your first missions to actually capture one has you fighting 3. Well, dung is a common thing that can be found anywhere on the map. Just by picking it up, it automatically loads it into your slinger. And any monster you shoot with it is going to try and run away. Now, I mean, obviously these things run away no matter how you shoot them. But you see that brown cloud around it. As long as it has the stink effect on it, it's going to run. So when you're tasked with hunting 2 or 3 of the same monster, or monsters in general, you can shoot 2 of them with dung, those 2 will run away, and then you can just fight one at a time, which is very useful in the higher ranks. So in addition to the various ammo you can find for your slinger just lying around on the map, there's also some very beneficial ones you can craft and take with you. So in your crafting list, we'll go over to traps and offense. And the dung pods you don't have to worry too much about, because if you pick one up, if you pick up dung out in the map, it automatically treats it as ammo. But the important ones here are going to be the flash pod and the luring pod. If you are trying, the luring pod is great against monsters you're struggling with, because I know by now, or anybody who's played this for a little while have seen the turf wars where multiple monsters show up and start fighting each other and you get free damage out of it. Well, the luring pod, if there's a monster nearby, you can shoot it and it'll lure them even closer to trigger those turf wars more often. So if you're having trouble killing something and you know there's other big monsters in the area, that's just a good way to make them fight each other. But the really beneficial one is going to be the flash pods. It's for people that are using melee builds, no bows, no bow guns, etc., and are having trouble hitting the flying monsters. You can make flash pods to take with you, and it temporarily blinds them, and 9 times out of 10 makes them fall down where you can reach them. Now, fortunately, in Wilds, there are far more environmental traps than I remember there being in any other game, so there's usually something you can use on the map anyway. But if you're in an area you know you're not going to have an environmental advantage, just make some flash pods to take with you. So last type of ammo I just want to mention is just more of a benefit than a necessary skill. As you're hunting the higher rank monsters, you'll notice pieces falling off of them that aren't really loot. You have a slicing pod, a heavy damage pod, or a heavy blunt pod, whatever. you can't take them with you. They're just free damage. If you see one of those drop off and you know the monster's about to run away or you need to back up for some reason anyway, just go ahead and pick one of them up and shoot them at it. Because those are already designed to be effective against the monster they fell off of. I mean, I have hit a wound with one of those piercing pods from the monster before and it did over 100 damage just on that one shot. So, I mean, it's just free damage. So the next thing I want to talk about is just some of the weapon status and how they work. I mean, attack is pretty obvious. It's going to be your base damage. But what a lot of people misunderstand here is your affinity. Honestly, instead of calling it affinity, they should call it critical rate. So the higher this percentage, the better chance you have of doing a crit. So like right here, it's 15%. So every time I land an attack with this weapon, there's a 15% chance of it doing critical damage. Now on the flip side of that, this will probably seem familiar to anyone who's played tabletop games, especially D&D, is in addition to critical successes, you also have critical failures. I know I don't want to craft that, but like this one here is a negative 10%. So that means every time I land an attack with this weapon, there is a 10% chance of it doing reduced damage. So that's the trade-off for having higher base damage, is there's a 10% chance that you'll do less with each swing. Now, the next thing I want to talk about on here is the status effects. You have poison weapons, sleep weapons. My favorite is the paralysis weapon. Each monster has a hidden health bar for each type of status effect, including mounting. So when you mount them, you'll notice after the first time you do it, it's harder to do the second time. Well, that's because each time you do it, they gain resistance. And it's the same with these. So like this weapon here, in addition to the 594 base damage, also does 210 damage to its invisible paralysis bar. And when that paralysis bar hits 0, it gets stunned, which in a lot of cases gives you ridiculous amounts of free damage when it's just stuck there in place for 20 seconds. But once that wears off, that health bar, that status bar refills, but is more. Every time you successfully stun it, it takes more stun damage to stun it again, and the same with poison, sleep, or any other status effect. So a lot of times on the harder hunts, I'll take 2 longswords with me. I will use this one until I've stunned it 3 times, and at that point the resistance is too high to really worry about, but I've also broken off most of its armor, so then I switch to an elemental damage that it's weak against. And the big one, though, is we need to talk about sharpness. You see right here all of these color codes. Those aren't just to look nice. I mean, you do more damage the higher it is, but what's really important is, again, use D&D as a reference, and we'll talk about the monster's AC in this case. So in D&D, when you roll an attack roll, if your attack roll is not higher than the monster's armor class, the attack misses. Same thing here. If this color drops below whatever the monster's armor is, your attacks will start bouncing off instead of doing damage. Let me equip a lower tier weapon and then we'll go out and take a look. Alright, so I went ahead and equipped low tier bone sword, and you see in the top left here, the sharpness is all the way down in the red. So we're going to go see what happens when I try to attack this Chemitress now. I haven't really looked into the breakdown, but I know in a lot of the other games, when you got to the end game with the tempered monsters, you could not even do damage to them unless you had at least blue sharpness. But here, oh, you see, hear that dink? I can yeah, see? So half the time my sword is just straight up bouncing off because I have no longer sharp. So it's doing 6 damage, which is insanely low, even for a low tier sword at level 3. Well, I'm at level 2 at the moment, but still. But I mean, look at that. It just bounces right off. Now, one benefit in Wilds over the older games is that you do have the Seikret. which you can sharpen while you're moving. So anytime you have to back up to heal, or if the monster changes positions, make sure you sharpen your weapon. Not only does it do more damage, but as you get into higher levels, you won't be able to do hardly any damage at all if it's not sharper than the monster's armor. Thing I wanted to talk about is food, which is something I'm imagine most people already know about, especially given the complaints when this game first came out that you no longer had palico chefs. But before you go on every hunt, make sure you eat. It costs nothing if you just do it with the rations and just gives you a nice buff. But you can also go in and create custom meals, where each one has its own benefit. Meat plus attack, fish plus defense, veggies plus defense and elemental resistances, and then your additional ingredients. These are a bit harder to get. You can get them by trading with NPCs for various things you loot around the map. They can buff damage, buff defense, status effects, stamina reduction. Plus they also increase the duration of the meal. And then you can also elemental resistance, heal quicker, negate the cold and hot effects so you don't need chill and hot potions. It's just free status buffs you can give yourself before every fight. So there's no reason to ever not cook. And in addition to the ones you could do yourself, one thing to keep an eye on, I don't think I have any right now. Let me go to the world map and look. Wait, I'm in the middle of the quest, that's why I can't. Give me one sec. Okay, so it's not available right now, but if you go to you'll get a message on your main screen while you're playing, but you can also come here and you see as I'm going over, it like says Abhor wants to talk, or where's another optional? Okay, succulent scraps available, troubles makers available. The places on here where it tells you about the optional quest being available, it'll also sometimes pop up and say so-and-so wants to feed you a meal. Which, if you go and let them cook for you instead of cooking yourself, it gives way more benefits and is the best status buffs you can get in the game. Usually lasts longer, and just if ever you see that pop up, just go ahead and go let them cook for you. It can almost double your stats in some cases. Alright, so one last thing I wanted to cover, and that's going to be capturing monsters. In addition to hunting them and harvesting them for parts, you also have the option to capture them, which will be required on some quests later on. The main difference is that you do not get it, since you don't carve them, you don't get quite as many drop parts from them, but you do get more hunter rank points. So if there's nothing you need from the monster, you can go ahead and capture it just to raise your hunter rank quicker. But unfortunately, like other things, the tutorial on that in the game is not quite the clearest. Effectively, what you have to do is incapacitate the monster in some way once it's low enough health. So if you'll notice, as you're going through the fight, it'll eventually pop up and say, the monster's looking weak, you're almost there, or something like that. And that lets you know it's low enough to capture. At which point, you can either use a pitfall trap, or a electric trap, or sleep it, or in a lot of cases, if you get it weak enough and let it run away, it'll just go to sleep on its own. But once it's incapacitated, then you use a tranquilizer. If you're using a bow or a bow gun, you have trank ammo and coatings that you can use without having to carry anything extra. But for most people, it's easier just to carry trank bombs, in which case you need to have at least 2. So once they're in the trap, just throw 2 trank bombs. So now that that's covered, let's go ahead and weaken this thing real quick, and then we'll show you what it looks like. Alright, so that's the message I was talking about. So hearing that lets you know that it's low enough to capture. Go ahead and harvest this real quick before I forget. And since he ran away, I might not even have to waste a trap. He might just go to sleep on his own back there. Which he is. So again, if he's awake, you would have to use a pitfall trap or an electro trap or a shock trap, whatever it's called, to get him incapacitated. But since he went ahead and fell asleep on his own from getting his butt kicked, wrong button. We can go ahead and just throw down 2 trank bombs. Oh, maybe not. In Worlds you could. I guess you do have to actually trap them now. That's annoying. Well, go ahead and drop the trap here.
Right on target.
But since the trank bombs were already in effect, that still triggers it. That does bother me about the sleep, though. I did not realize they had changed that. So yes, you will need some kind of trap and 2 forms of trank, whether it's the trank bombs, which you can craft, or trank ammunition and coating on a ranged weapon. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. Again, there's most of the stuff here I'm sure a lot of the players already know about, but like I said, just watching that stream last night, I realized there's a lot of this stuff that never gets covered in the game, or even if it does, the tutorial doesn't explain it very well. So I just wanted to take a minute and go over a few of the basics here for some of the newer players, and hopefully it helps some people out. Y'all have a good one, and enjoy the hunts.